Welcome, everybody, to episode 48 of the Unchained Vodcast. First, of course, we have the big news, at least since our last cast. We have Beta 1 date, which is set for July 4th. I forget, what is the feature lock date?
June 12th?
June 12th.
June 12th, yeah. So after June 12th, they will not be adding any new features to the game, or to the build for Beta 1 anyway, for the first Beta 1 build, and just be working on making it smooth and pretty and functional so that we don't get into Beta 1 and immediately riot.
It's gonna happen anyway.
Oh, yeah. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, the this date is earlier than I feared. So I'm at least a little bit hyped because of that. I was really worrying about it being a late or early Q4 date. So this episode 47. Oh, I forgot to change that.
Oops. Oh well.
Oops.
We'll edit that in post.
Oh no, I have the overlay. There we go. I just forgot to switch it. All right. It is fixed now. It says episode 48.
Remember, guys, we're professionals.
I don't get paid for this.
It is surprisingly early, though.
Yeah.
I think people were expecting a much later date, hoping for an early one.
Yeah.
And they got it.
It's not as early as I was hoping for at various points, but it is earlier than I feared. So,
yes.
With that, we will go on and discuss our topic for the evening, which leads me to a few questions for everybody. Are you MMOFA? Forever Alone? Do you have a rift in your heart? Do you wow yourself on Valentine's? Today we're talking about soloing. And so to start that, I have to ask, who here, I know I'm so corny, who here fully intends to solo in Camelot Unchained? And kind of to add on to that, why do people solo in massively multiplayer games?
Why are you a masochist?
Well, I don't intend to answer that out. So
I fully expect that I will solo sometimes, because I always solo in MMOs. Not to say that that's my primary activity, but I always end up soloing some of the time. So I feel like I can answer some question why at least I end up soloing a lot. And it pretty much comes down to two things. Despite the fact that I am on camera right now, I have social anxiety. I don't like people. I am not good at interacting with people, which I also have a pretty social job too, so I have to pretend. But I can do it. I can go out and I can talk to people and stuff, but it tires me out. I don't enjoy doing it. And I feel like a lot of gamers, people who stay inside a lot and play on the computer, surely are not super outgoing. Also, I'm lazy. And so I'm like, I don't want to form a group. God, I got to go post in the thing and then see if anyone's going to want me in their group. And then I might not get anything. And so then I'm going to feel rejected. That's just too much work. I'll just go do something by myself. Which, for me...
That's why I'm in a guild.
That's
I
why
don't have to worry about that.
That's why I'm in a multi-gaming community. I don't have to. I can just go in at any time and be like, is anybody playing? All right, I'm going to join you. We're going to go do stuff. Let's see. Eptevos be soloing here and there, otherwise running with a guild. Yeah, I feel it's the same thing. I'll usually be running with guild groups, but sometimes I'll be like, I'm too lazy.
For me, it's kind of it goes with the territory. I've spent my MMO career playing on American servers, being in the EU. There are times when I'm online and everybody's sleeping. So, and since I generally don't like pugging in MMOs, because it's not so much social anxiety.
Not my favorite thing.
I don't trust people. I don't trust gamers. I know they're going to screw up, and half the time I don't trust them to do their job. So I tend to not pug, so I tend to solo when none of my guildies are online.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's about the only situation.
Kind of bring up a good point, or they lead to a good point in chat. There's no PvE in the game, really.
Yeah.
Which is a huge staple of MMOs, going off doing your own thing by yourself, questing. There's not going to be much.
Especially since quests in MMO now are solo mostly.
Right. So we're talking about solo in the sense of group activities for PvP. Why would anyone solo in an RVR environment by themselves going off when this is an environment especially promoted and advertised as being a 100,000, maybe not thousand, but thousands of total players. Doesn't quite make sense to do it. So why?
Yeah, we've got a few people. Dolo says he'll be soloing. Pocket Lint likes to farm solo and quest, which again, as you said, there's not PvE questing. So what I thought we would talk about for today is first just classes. Which classes will be useful or be best at solo type play? And then what should solo players be able to even do in the game? Then looking at what the role of solo players can be in the larger scale of battles, as well as finally what CSC should perhaps or reasonably do to accommodate solo players. So that's kind of the outline of everything. And so I did want to start with what classes we think, as they've been outlined in the game, already just lend themselves towards solo play. And I will amend that slightly by saying I think largely in this we're going to be talking about combat soloing. Obviously, if you're off in the city main capital role playing, you can do that with well, you can't really solo that, but I guess you could.
You can solo role play,
but if you're if you're in the main safe city crafting, well, but obviously you can solo all day as long as you have money to buy your mats.
Crafting outside the city, or at least gathering. A lot of people in chat are talking about gathering to that. You don't usually group up for that unless you're trying to get protection.
So when we're talking about being on your own and actually engaging in combat, which classes are going to at least be reasonably decent at that?
Are we talking about like in the world, you're by yourself, you're running through, you happen upon one other person, and you're looking at a 1v1
largely because I don't think anyone should be 1v2ing anything.
Well, stealthers first, obvious choice.
The obvious choice, and then choice I know Sacrix is gonna like rage over because he doesn't want to
scouts,
stealthers towards the solo environment. Scout, I mean, the aspect of a scout is to kind of be off on their own. Kind of falls in line with crafting, almost being out and gathering. Kind of what they're built for.
Yeah, not really built for the one-on-one combat so much though.
No.
But should be able to get away. Should be able to survive. I would think.
Any class with a high mobility and a way to self regenerate or self rejuvenate their blood or their energy tends to stand a chance. It's the non-mobile classes, and I say mobile, and yet I say the support class not at all, even though they provide the mobility. The fact is they support other players, so I don't see them actually.
They have the survivability, but not the damage output.
Right. So at that point, you're looking at potentially shapeshifters tend to have high mobility or high variable. In their skill set. With some
archers.
Of them, possibly.
They've got
archers
some stealth
with the camouflage, so providing them a level of stealth. And their range that allows them to set up their own
Winter Shadow. Of the three of them, I absolutely think
Winter Shadow.
I would say the Archer definitely could, as long as they're on the offensive. The problem with the Archer is if they get caught,
and maybe that's the key
being
thing.
Attacked, they're kind of SOL.
On whether you are on the offensive or defensive, because let's say 9 times out of 10. Both classes that meet each other being equal skill level, the person who initiates tends to have the advantage.
Yes.
So. Yeah. And I agree, Dolos. I mean, solo does not necessarily mean you're not around other people. We're going to be kind of talking about that context in a little bit. For me, the best class for soloing, I think, is going to be heavy fighters. I think it comes down to durability, versatility, and survival. Who can survive? Which in some cases means speed, being able to get in or out of combat. In other cases, I think it just means being able to out tank and out endure the other person. If they don't have any heals, they're too squishy for single combat. I think I think heavy fighters will do well in it because there's a wide swath of different classes that I think one on one they will be able to do very well against, unsupported.
I think the Mjolnir of the three, I think it boils down, before I go into that, specifically to the different realms as well. It's not just heavy fighters. Some versions of the heavy fighter will be better at it than others. In that case, I think the Mjolnir, which has a hybrid range melee combination.
I think the Fianna has some speed benefits as well.
Speed. Black
or
Knight
escape
has
mechanisms or something.
Yeah. The Black Knight has the ability to, dive in really quickly, heavy damage mitigation. But I think range, the combination of the range and the melee gives the Mjolnir the advantage overall with other classes as well. And he does elemental damage too. So he kind of has a little bit of a hybrid thing going on with him. We already talked last cast about how hybrids tend to have a lot more power, we think, than the specialty classes.
By definition, a lot more versatility.
So outside of just joining into larger battles and contributing in some ways in there, what sort of things do you think solo players should be able or will be able to do in Camelot Unchained on their own?
Not a lot.
Well, combat-wise, probably
gather
not too
resources.
Much. They can gather resources. They can
if they're crafters, because if not, most of their resources are going to be for self-use, because they're going to be crap.
They could do caravan escorts.
Yes.
That's entirely feasible. Whether or not they succeed, if that caravan gets heavy attack fire, not so much. But they can at least perform that action if no one attacks it. They're great.
And as we said earlier, they can solo within a group, like several solo people protecting one caravan, but not coordinating themselves among each other. That's still solo play.
They're
just
off
going in the same direction.
Stragglers in a group where speed is often utilized through the support class. Those who, for some reason, either lose the buff or don't have the buff to begin with, kind of fall behind the main group, and they can start picking off those left behind. And they can, dare I say, even perform the role of a scout, minus the super stealthiness that they get. They can do some idea of the general concept of scouting, but not in the way that a scout class actually does.
Yeah, there's definitely scouting out targets. I think a pretty decent role for kind of out on their own or in small 1 to 2, like 2-3 man groups for soloers is kind of cutting off reinforcements, getting behind the large battles, finding out where they're coming from, and just sitting out there and waylaying people as they try to come back from wherever they're respawning at. And as Bram mentioned, they can do the basic scouting role, and then most likely they're going to have to. Somebody's going to have to fulfill that in some capacity until we have scouts.
Until the scouts,
especially if scouts have a lower popularity and population in the game, you'll find yourself needing to do some level of that without an actual scout. Scouts are more deep kind of penetration scouting, so.
I have to disagree there. I absolutely hope that no single person is going to be good enough to actually take out a whole other group by themselves. That would be
a
kind of ridiculous.
That would be a serious.
I have no issue with a really good player being able to take out 2, maybe even 3 people who aren't very good by themselves, or really new players, but and a really good player being able to take out 2 people, sure. But like a whole group, that would, I think, be sign of a bigger problem.
Even too, with the proposed combat system and the slowness of it, is going to be such a prolonged fight. I don't see being able to take 2. 1v1 is already going to be kind of tough, I believe, prolonged, and then also just tough in the sense that both people have time to really think about what they're doing. So when you're going up with two people who actually have time to counter whatever you're by
Yeah.
yourself is doing, it's going to be hard.
I think it could
And
be
that has
doable though,
nothing to do
because
with casuals.
I think it could be doable though, because it would just depend on the class makeup as well. I mean, if you're talking about a heavy fighter against two other heavy fighters that just kind of suck, then he's probably not going to do very well against both of them. But or a heavy fighter, for instance, against two mages, I could see that, especially because you can line of sight them. You can kite behind, keep one of them in between you and the other one, and they can't really hit you with their spells, and you're just sitting there beating the crap out of the first guy, while the second one's like trying to hit you and can't get around. I could see there being some combinations where that could work out pretty easily.
But a full group, no.
Yeah, and it all depends on spell building as well. With balancing with spells, some spells can be probably pretty potent, not quite one-shot kills, but definitely high damage spells with consequences to them.
So, with the limited amount of things that we think soloers will be able to do in CU, but there are some things, roam out, cut off supply lines, help gather, help maybe guard healers, as Old Boy mentioned, also fulfill some scouting roles. We come to the big thing that they can do, joining into larger battles with everyone else, because this is a large-scale RVR game. What roles do you think solo players, what will they be able to do? What will they be doing in joining these battles, assuming that they're not just joining into pugs? Because obviously anybody can join into a pug, but if someone's soloing, they're not in a group. So
they're not in the group. They're probably not in a voice chat with a main organized group. They're just kind of there to be there. For the large part of it, I see them either not even caring about whatever the main group is doing and kind of doing their own thing near or relative to that, or just following the main group basically and kind of doing what they do as a reactionary strategy. If the main group starts to go off west or whatever, there's probably going to be a little bit of delay as that solo person sees, oh, they're going to do this. I'll just follow, and then kind of trails behind. And I wonder at that point if some of these buffs, like say for the support buffs, are group based, which they've hinted long ago that could be the case. How do solo players really interact with all the things going on if they're not getting the same type of benefits that other grouped individuals are getting? It's not to say they won't get any of them, but that they may not get all of them.
That was something I had particularly worried about, because they certainly didn't say it was definite, but they did heavily suggest they were thinking that the bards and support classes would be only buffing their teammates, or at least primarily. Their good buffs and everything will only affect their actual 8-man team. So you have to have the support in a team to really get their good buffs. And if you're trying to solo a bard or something, it may not be feasible in large groups.
Well, now that we have different group compositions, they can extend the effectiveness of those to not to a campaign, but to a warband at least, for example.
Potentially,
that the effect of a bard buff would go towards the full warband rather than just the 8-man.
Now, one thing that does presumably work and would be in this capacity, in the large group battle capacity, very effective as a soloing class, I would think, is the Devout. Or any class that really has AoE type heals and direct buffs, where you could just follow along and say, oh, look, there's a big group that's attacking this castle. I'm just going to follow along and go, heals.
I think that's definitely much more plausible. I think even just regular healers in general could probably do it, especially the free aim targeting healers, the stone healers, and the physicians. But the empaths may find that a little more difficult if they have to use UI to do that, and targeting to do that. They don't have the free aim. But healers in general, I think, will probably be able to be a solo player, if not effective, just because they're a healer in the sense that they can't perform any other role aside from that until you get to the devouts who can do damage and healing.
Yeah, and Duelos, that's why I mentioned the AoE heals, because as Sacrix mentioned, UI will be an issue too. If you're not in a group, you don't really get the health bars and things. So you could still heal. I don't see any reason you couldn't target heal. They've only mentioned the possible group limit being for support characters and their AoE buffs. I think a part of the reason they mentioned that was because they don't want people to bot with buff characters who run around
buff
outside
bots.
a group and just buff bot them. They don't want people doing that. So that's probably a reason they're considering that limitation on the support classes themselves. But the another thing I thought of, let's see. Look at my list there. I do think that solo players could play DPS classes and specifically look out certain targets of opportunity. They don't necessarily need groups for that. Just sneak around and go after the healers. Look for the healers and the mages.
Damage targets.
They could act as siege defenders, in a group that has and they're not, wanting to get too far into things. They can just chill back and sit by a siege and defend it. If it's getting attacked, or just sit by the siege and watch as things happen around them.
Now, does anybody else have anything in particular that they think solo players will be able to or should be able to be doing in the large battle context? That was pretty much my list.
I understand that a large part of the MMO community nowadays is used to soloing, and there's a lot of people that want to solo that don't want the hassle to group. But then this game is a niche game, very targeted towards a specific audience. I don't want solo to be even a secondary focus of the team. I want, if solo players want to find ways to play solo, that's on them. I don't want the team to try and cater to those. Even if MJ said that he's a solo player, I don't think he meant as a solo running around on his own, but more not joining a guild or something like that.
I asked about that.
Yeah. So he's more the time to pug, basically.
Yeah, basically he's just in. He's got an hour to play because he spends all of his time working, and he just wants to get into the action really quickly. Isn't in a guild or anything. He's just, let's go do this, and he joins a group randomly. He'll go out into the battlefield alone and then join a group. And
I have to say that as someone who solos in a lot of MMOs, because again, people kind of suck. Or I should say traditionally has soloed in a lot of MMOs, because I haven't always soloed since I've joined Legend Gaming. But I still sometimes do because I just don't feel like getting a group together and I just want to go run off and do quests or whatever. I felt like we had to do this topic because soloing keeps coming up in every single Q&A. People are asking about soloing and talking about soloing and this about soloing.
For solo players,
but really, when it comes down to it, I entirely agree. I don't really give a shit if they do anything for soloers.
Pretty much.
I should say I really don't want to see them doing a whole lot or changing the game to cater towards it. As Sacrix mentioned, the game is supposed to have forced socialization. You're supposed to have to get in a group for some things. I do think that they don't necessarily need to force that and be heavy-handed with it. I do think there is some room for solo play in the game. And so that's kind of the last big question I had. What do you think CSE is doing or should do to support solo play that is reasonable for this game?
Battlegrounds. They're already doing it, so
I hate every word you just said right now.
I know. Each instance of that.
I'm turning you off.
Yes. But that's a testing system.
It is. They actually talked
scenarios.
About either Friday or when they did the beta announcement that they have plans at least to convert the scenarios into battleground type gameplay after launch.
I will have to look that
I
back
hope
up because I don't
I
recall
hope
that.
it never comes to fruition.
They talk, yeah,
Because I
it's
hate
not
Battlegrounds.
100% confirmed, but they talked about it. They've thought about it. They've thought about converting scenarios because that question always keeps coming up too. Are scenarios being moved to the game after beta? And the initial answer is no. However, we are looking at perhaps battleground type things with them because the tech's already there.
The
It's
only
probably coming. Say
the
it now.
only application I could see for that type of tech would be in the depth. That's it. Everything else detracts from the main goal of the game if you put battlegrounds in there. I don't have anything
Does, but
against
I think
battlegrounds
some of
in
it has
other games.
changed.
I
It
do.
has no point in CU.
I hate Battlegrounds
I
all
think
the
some
time.
of the,
No, because
the
this way
ideas
I cannot join
changed.
them. I can avoid them. But in CU, it has no point and it has no reason there because it detracts from the main RVR dynamic of the game. And I certainly hope
Oh, I
it
absolutely
never
agree.
comes to fruition.
But they're talking about it, so
Now,
they're
not
not talking
like
about it that it's happening. They're talking about it that they've thought about it.
Okay,
It's possible.
apparently, so I missed that because I was at work during the last Q&A. Apparently, it's only for beginner players as a type of tutorial to teach them the mechanics.
Maybe.
And for that, I would be okay with.
well, I think
that-
they've mentioned that before. Previously, was possibly having some sort
they
of
mentioned a type of arena
yeah.
to teach people how to
I think it's different
handle
from-
their character, and for that, I would be okay with because that can have a use.
Go
In
back
the
and
main
watch either
cities.
Friday or
Yeah.
the date of the beta announcement. I'll do it too. I know they talked about it in one of those too.
Yeah.
At any rate, we're a little bit skewed off
Yeah.
topic
Yeah.
of what they can do for solo players.
Well,
Not like
you can put
mentioned.
them in the battlegrounds. That's a solo player's reserve.
That's very much a solo player.
Not like mentioned
Solo
classes.
player's reservation.
And so I did
Keep them
want to
there.
I did want to mention that briefly because we do know that, of course, crafters exist, which don't necessarily have to be solo, but crafting and building things is generally a solo activity, though they've talked about group crafting as well. But also, scouts is inherently a soloing sort of
Oh, yeah.
activity. Again, doesn't necessarily always have to be, but running around, updating maps, looking for targets is
It's not
generally
exactly a group job.
It's solo by nature of what the
The classes.
act of doing it is, but it's not solo in the context of what we're talking about.
I
It
think
just happens to be an individual task that only that person can really do. It doesn't need a group to do it.
I think either one of them, and this is where I'm coming from with it, I think either one of them can be suitable options for people who want to do solo play in the game, who don't want to have to join groups all the time.
Yeah.
They can go, oh, well, I don't really want to join groups all the time, so I could be a scout and just run around and look for targets and update that for other people, or I could go do crafting and I can kind of do that. And sometimes I do have to group up and do things, but most of the time I'm just sitting here gathering materials or building my thing. I don't have to necessarily worry about group play that much.
I agree, Doulos. It is the effectiveness of solo to be catered to or designed towards also requires the thinking of the other larger aspects of the RVR system.
Yeah, that's kind of off topic a little bit, but I definitely agree. That's what I really wanted to see in TISO. When TISO was first coming out, they talked about how you're going to have keeps, but then you're also going to have these other objectives around them that are really important as well, and you have to take those, and so on and so forth. So it would split the groups up. They were completely unimportant. I mean, you basically just end up zerging through some of them to the keep, or taking the keep and then zerging back out to one of them and taking it. They were completely secondary. If they build the game where there are potentially multiple objectives that really need to be addressed at the same time on the map, that helps to keep people from just clumping up in a giant group, along with the massive map size, because then it's somewhat inefficient to have one big group just milling around into, just mobbing around from point to point if those points are very far apart.
but at least they did say that they're going to balance the classes and introduce mechanics that make it so Zerg are not all powerful. So there will be a balancing around that also.
Not just classes, but
Mhm.
veil storms, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are some other things I think can be done here. First thing, one that they're already doing are bounties. I think that bounties are actually pretty useful for solo players because they'll help to give them focus and direction. Our guild can want to take
Yeah.
this keep, and we can put up a bounty to try to lure the pugs and everybody to help us siege it, so they have
Yeah.
a reason to come in force and help us attack that. Other guilds may take us up on that as well, but the people who are kind of
The
solo
carrot.
playing or playing in pugs, they can see that and go, oh, there's a marker on the map to go do that thing, and so maybe we should group up and go do that.
For bounties, I would still want to have a group. If the bounty is for a specific single person,
Yeah.
I definitely want to take a group with me just to have advantage in numbers.
Oh, yeah.
There's no reason for me to go by myself.
Yes,
don't
but
necessarily
people who
that.
want to solo can do that
Yeah,
more
yeah,
easily,
But-
than going into a large scale battle.
They'll know
Sure.
that they've got a reward for going over there, and
Well-
there's probably other groups going over there as well. So they're probably not going to be one person, but they'll get there, and there'll be other people heading
Yeah.
towards that
If it's
objective.
a player bounty,
or
that player could be in the midst of another group because that player happens to not be a
Yeah.
solo player.
Yeah, I was thinking more of like objective bounties, like targeting a
Okay.
keep or
Gotcha.
guarding a caravan, for instance.
Sure.
Things of that nature.
Basically, yeah, questing basically.
Yeah, kind of. It's basically player-made quests for solo players.
Yeah.
To a certain degree, they're just PvP quests.
And that's
I don't
also
think
true
there's
for
any class that
Sacrex.
is really solo designed for solo Sacrex.
I think any class with stealth has a tendency to solo, if
Yeah.
only because they abuse the privilege of being able to move around unseen.
Yes, but the way they talked about the stealth system in CU makes it a lot different.
It is
than
different because
traditional
you can see
stealthing.
other stealth if you're stealth.
Yes.
And you can detect other people in the veil if you are in the veil.
Yeah.
There's that element, but by and large, not the company from the Pixar movies, but
Yeah.
by and large, you stealthers tend to abuse
Yes.
that ability and tend to kind of go off on their own a bit.
And I think the thing is with the stealthers, if they want to contribute to the large scale battle, they're going to have to group up anyway. Not necessarily
Yeah.
with other groups, they're going to have to group up with other stealthers because, okay, you're a stealther and there's a 100v100 battle and you sneak around to the back to kill their healer. You come out of stealth, you're going to have 100 people on that side of the map waiting to kill you. It's not going to
Possibly.
be, or you're going to, at the very least, that healer is probably in a group. And we know that time to kill in this game is going to be somewhat slower. So most likely you're
And
not going to
that's
be able to
why-
kill that healer before that whole
That is
group
why-
murders you.
Yeah.
Last cast, I said the stealthers would be good at dealing with archers because the archers are literally the back end of that
Mhm.
large group and they can get in at the very end, deal their damage in, and then leave. I can see
Yeah.
solo players, stealthers, at least focusing on archers as a possibility.
Yeah, because if you're going, archers are probably going to be a better target for solo players than healers because healers are going to be protected. Going against the healers, even as a stealther, is kind of like a suicide mission.
Yeah.
Because you can't with the CU stealth system, you can't just pop out of stealth, kill somebody, and pop back in.
As Dula says, who cares if a few archers die, really?
Well, if the balance of the
If they're
classes-
yours, you
So-
might care.
you might care, one, if they're your friends, but two, if the
Yeah.
the balance of what classes work against other classes actually starts to show that it matters, having your archers start to die will start to impact your effectiveness against certain other classes. If that group has a class makeup that archers are actually good against, not having those archers is going to hurt you.
I do think one thing that has to be kept in mind for all of these is, as we've been saying, the game has forced socialization. We don't really want the game catering to solo players. And so in these battles, most of these people will not be soloing. So you could say
Yeah.
archers and or stealthers and solo stealthers may be able to go after archers better, but most of those archers are still going to be in a group. Even if they're out in the back or on a hill, there's going to be 6-8 archers up on that hill. So if 2 stealthers come and pop out, they're probably going to get shot in the face by 8 arrows, and they're probably going to die.
And that's why, while it might seem like I might be agreeing with solo play to some extent, really the effectiveness of a stealth like rogue type class to be able to go around and do that is to have a group with them, also distracting some of the focus fire away from them.
Or
either way,
or a group of 8 stealthers who pop out and start stabbing healers.
Yes.
You're gonna die most likely if you're doing that behind a whole enemy army. But if you kill 5 or 6 healers in the process, that's probably worth it.
Change the tide of battle. Yes.
The point of it all is, while a solo stealther, let's say, can go off and do them, the best case scenario for them to be able to do it effectively is to be in a group.
But then, as Sakrik said, the campaign might provide the carrot, bringing the solo players into the fold and showing them that being in a group and in a coordinated organization might be more enjoyable in this game than going off on your own and trying to be a one-man hero.
Yeah, I do think that that's one of the reasons why I mentioned and I like the idea of the bounties, because I see that as a potential way to help bring those solo players and pug players as well in line with what the overarching realm goals are. You know, if most of the largest guilds in the realm decide we want to do X, Y, and Z, they can potentially create bounties for those objectives to pull the pug and solo players in along with them for what they're trying to do.
I can see a kind of going similar to bounties, but more of a person-to-person agreement. A crafter like Kriss is going out to gather some,
hiring solo players.
He's like, hey, just in case there's another crafter out there who's stealing my crap, come with me, kill that guy. You know, just a guy who's guarding a crafter going out. A player-made arrangement, not an official thing provided by the game or by CSE.
Well, they were talking about doing official game-supported bodyguard contracts.
Oh, there you go.
So,
basically that.
Yeah.
So one thing that's been mentioned in chat a couple of times, totally 180 from these topics, is farming. Which we don't know much about because we don't know much about the crafting system, but we do know that they've mentioned the possibility of farming or possibly cultivating some sorts of resources for crafters, and so that again may be some type of content Soloworld can do, as well as just playing the economy. That is one thing. You know, we've mentioned there are going to be disparate and spread out markets. Somebody has to be moving these resources around, so there is possibly a role for somebody who enjoys that. I know some people really like moving things around, buying where things are cheap and selling them where they're expensive so that they can make a ton of money.
Rich merchant.
And there's no reason somebody couldn't do that in this game with how it's if it works how they seem to want it to work.
Yeah. Which we don't know.
Wants to know about the viability of it all as a whole, given the current known plan for mechanics, and I'm assuming that means attack, TTK.
Time to
kill.
Oh, time to kill. There you go. Which we kind of talked about earlier. Maybe that's something you missed while you were gone. This is a very long-paced combat system. It's going to take multiple shots to kill someone. You can't just unstealth, stab, dead, move on to the next guy.
Yeah.
There's going to be reactionary time for everybody. Is that viable? I guess I'll ask this question.
Well, I guess I'm not sure if he's referring to solo players or stealthers.
I think he means.
I would say in
I think,
either case.
I'm assuming he's talking about 1v1s.
Yeah. For 1v1, I mean, it's just going to take the amount of time to kill somebody. I don't think it's necessarily going to take an hour.
No.
Well, because they've mentioned before, they've kind of speculated a little bit on time to kill and how it'll take a while. But 1v1, it may take possibly even a couple minutes to kill somebody. I don't know, depending on what their class is and your class and everything. But I don't think it's going to take any ridiculous amount of time.
It shouldn't. I certainly can't talk. None of us can really talk about it. But the current time on current test servers is actually not terrible.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
It's granted they've changed some things and disabled some
Yes.
things because people figured out how to make it terrible.
And at current, it may not be anything like what's in game.
Yes, also.
Could end up longer than it is now. What it is now isn't bad. Certainly leaves room for other things to be desired,
but when it comes to like stealthers, I think the time to kill is not necessarily a problem because again, it works both ways. If you pop out behind a healer and you're trying to stab him before people can kill you, you've got a long time to kill for killing him comparative to other games. But that doesn't mean
you can one shot.
No one can one shot you either, and the entire team can't shoot you at the same time because again we have line of sight issues in the game. So they have to get to you. They have to go around people to be able to reach you in the first place.
Yeah. And as Sakrik said, with a relatively longer time to kill, there is more chance of a group or friends to the guy who's trying to kill to
that is
find
totally
you.
viable.
But that's actually fun. Those are the types of fights that when I was PvPing and other MMOs, not that I play any right now, those were fun. When you started off with a 1v1, suddenly a buddy comes over from their side and you're like, oh shit. And then another random person comes on your side and it becomes a slightly larger thing. Those are fun. Those are bad.
And I have to say, I agree. It does increase the risk for a longer time to kill. If someone's trying to 1v1 somebody else, they may run away or someone may interrupt the fight. But again, as Sacrix has spam chat with repeatedly, I don't want them catering for solo play.
Oh, no, definitely not.
If you want a 1v1, that's great, but you take the risks of doing that. And other people may interrupt it and they may come in and kill you. But that's the risk you accept by deciding to solo.
Yeah,
and whether they cater to it or not, let's say they don't cater to it, it's largely a group-based system. There's still going to be people traveling from point A to point B in a group, but by themselves, perhaps trying to get to where their group is. That you're going to engage in 1v1 fights eventually.
Yes, but then if somebody's traveling solo, that means the solo player who wants to gank that guy, he's going to have to think twice.
Right.
Am I going to be able to kill that guy before the rest of his group shows up and ganks me instead?
Yeah, honestly, I think there are ways that solo players can make like one-on-one combat and things happen and make that work out. But by and large, I think the biggest combative role for single players and soloing players is going to be to find their role within the larger context of the battle, be working with the larger groups, even if they're not actually talking to them, they're not actually joining any groups, but to be able to identify, okay, this is where the battle is going to be. I'm going to show up in AoE heal, or I'm going to show up and I'm going to just stand in front of them with my shield and block hits, or whatever they enjoy doing in combat, and how they can do that with other groups, or they can join pugs. And find other groups that they have an easy time joining with, or find relatively non-combative roles to fulfill, such as scout or crafting or so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I disagree, Tulos. I don't want objectives that are efficient for one player's time.
Maybe a smaller group rather than a zero.
Yes, smaller group, yes.
Oh,
solo players now.
I absolutely agree. I definitely want to see some small group content. Some just eight-man content. You have your 8-man group. You can go out and do X. I think that we need a lot of content that really caters to that instead of just keep sieges, because I don't want to see just constant keep battles.
Oh yeah, no,
those get boring after a while. And then the solo players can even more so affect those small group battles in many of the same ways they can the larger like 100v100 battles. But I definitely don't want to see content specifically created or objectives specifically created for solo players. That's kind of one of the main things I don't want, because as I said, I don't really care if somebody can solo in the game.
And that's you brought up ESO.
Problem. Sakura was saying that's a real problem with building design. If you're building a keep that can be taken by one person, I can assure you within 30 seconds, it's gonna fall and it's gonna become resources for my city that I'm gonna use your resources for.
Yeah. You brought up ESO earlier, Vellic. And I kind of had the same expectations of the scale of combat within their Cyrodiil map, and it turned out not to be kind of at all what we actually thought. It was still one large group kind of moving around to even these smaller design elements, like taking over these 3 outer farms in order to unlock taking over the city. And they did have some of that uh, development for smaller scale things, but even the main larger group still utilize them. And that's kind of where I hope to see a difference here, is that there are things quite quite literally designed for only a small group and things meant for only a large group, um, where there is a need to actually spread across the larger map that exists rather than one large group moving from point A to point B to point C to point E.
Unfortunately, I think I think the failing point for TISO with that, and the only way that perhaps that sort of thing can work, like I want it to work, is there need to be some objectives that have to be taken simultaneously. Because if it's not simultaneous, then you can just go mob here and mob there. Now, the one advantage I think CU does have is in the map scale. Because with if the things are spread so far apart, it's really hard to zerg from point A to point B. When if it takes half an hour to get to each one, it's a really inefficient usage of your time instead of splitting your group. So that may be a way they can coerce some of the groups to split up, is by simply making it an ineffective use of your time to have to go to every point by yourself or as one group.
And now that we're talking about the map itself, that kind of reminds me of Battlefield. No, PlanetSide. PlanetSide 2, with the map that they have. There are all these different areas that
you need to take 2 to 3 objectives
can go, and you had all these different areas on the map that were having different combat objectives on, and a solo player can perhaps spend their time trying to restabilize or destabilize one of the stabilizers that connects another map to their realm that's kind of unguarded at the moment. That seems like another thing.
Yeah,
they might be.
I still
capable of doing.
Would say PlanetSide 2 is still pretty zergy.
Yes, it is.
But I would say it has worked to some degree. Some groups do at least splinter off from the Zerg.
I can assure you, yes, it's zergy, but my 2.5 years in PlanetSide 2, I was in a very small 6 to 8 man guerrilla styled outfit. We would take bases, divert huge forces towards those bases. Just by the 8 of us, we were known on our server to do that. So it is still something I would love to be able to do the same things in CU, where a small 8-man, well coordinated, knowing their classes, knowing their class composition, their strength and their weaknesses, being able to be a very effective diversion to a huge force to allow the rest of their realm to go and take another more important or as important objective.
Yeah.
That's something maybe solo players can group together, pug together basically, to do. But yeah, that's still a group objective.
I brought up PlanetSide 2 because I remember solo playing that and
soloed a lot
for a long time, working at the very back end of an enemy territory and backcapping by myself, basically. And it may not work for this map style with stabilizers and interchanging puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
You might have to go linearly to the middle. If you don't, I could see a solo player, a stealther, particularly better at it than others, kind of working their way towards the very back of an enemy controlled territory and kind of destabilizing their territories.
Yeah.
I will say that's actually, if they do make it so that it's capable for smaller groups, to kind of sneak in and maybe not over time completely capture an enemy base, but do enough to it to distract your armies to come over there and stop them from taking it or to take
Right.
it back.
Like,
That
someone's
that
taking the field.
does
Everyone go that way.
that does also provide potentially another use for scouts once those get in the game, because they will have the speed and the mobility
Yes.
and the stealth that if something like that is happening to one of the keeps, they can get over there before the whole army gets there and then go, guys, it's like 8 guys. Don't send everybody. We
Yeah.
don't need the whole army. Keep them over there. Just send like 2 groups and we'll wipe them out.
Yeah.
Of course, they won't know. They might just send everyone go that way, and it turns out there's one guy there. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my god, we just ran 20
Um,
minutes
and-
to
and
get
yeah,
here.
I agree that you shouldn't need to have the connecting territories to be able to cap. You
Yeah.
might need to do that for the place of powers, for the I forgot the name, the thing that links the islands together,
Stabilizers.
the stabilizers. You might need the interconnecting territories to connect your stabilizers to pull the territory towards your realm. But for the
disconnect.
rest of the player built objective and places of powers, you should be able to cap anywhere, anytime.
I know there was a thread a couple weeks ago, which is why I brought it up. Someone was talking about how the map might interchange, and there's been a lot of nothing since the BSC days where they were talking about the map.
Yeah.
But that would be, I think, a good potential solo objective is stabilizers.
Yeah. Maybe not stabilizers, because that's a very important objective. Places of powers,
Those are
maybe.
long objectives.
Yeah.
It's meant to be long. So
Yes. They can help towards the realm objective, but being able to cap a stabilizer by yourself, I really don't want to see that.
I could see it. I think it would depend on a few things. One of the things I would like to see is that stabilizers are not necessarily defended automatically, but that you can potentially build up a settlement and defenses around a stabilizer. So you could build a stabilizer, and then if you leave it unguarded, why shouldn't one person be able to walk up and knock it over and go, well, you didn't build a wall around it, so nah. But you have the option to build like a city or a fort around a stabilizer to defend it with NPC guards and everything. And then at that point, surely no one can solo walk in and take it, unless I guess you really ignored it for a long time. At any rate, we're on to stabilizers and all kinds of things. We're kind of off of solo by and large.
Yeah.
I had a reason for it.
Do what?
It was regarding solo play objectives. I had a reason.
So at any,
I don't know. Olvik is saying about if 2 or more solo players are in close proximity of one another, maybe the game can fade in a temporary group window. I don't really see the point, because most people who are going to run solo,
I'm going to hit ignore on that button all day.
First.
Go away.
And 2,
like
they don't want a
group
group.
invites.
They're running solo because they want to run solo. So there's no point in spending time developing that kind of tool. That's mostly going to get ignored.
I hate random groups.
Yeah.
It's like
completely irrelevant to the importance or unimportance of solo play. Can anyone make a warband? Can a solo player make a named warband and invite no one to it?
I think so.
That's a good question.
Therefore,
Yeah, they might. Yeah,
probably.
I think they might. Yeah.
Interesting, but again, irrelevant because it doesn't matter. It's just a name. But
if they're on their own, yeah,
people will probably do it.
Yeah.
Just
to
have
reserve
at least
names.
the ability to invite people to it at that point if they felt like it. Then they're not a solo player anymore.
Yes, and they might do it just to reserve the name, but that's it.
All right. I think we've about exhausted ourselves on solo play itself, so I did want to go ahead and at least end the recording where we're at here. But first, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out and say that in 2 weeks,
thank you.
Our next episode, we will be talking about CSE support for, unless there's a big topic to talk about, we'll be talking about CSE support for role players in non-RP servers, how they can support that, how that might look. At least that's the plan so far. So if you're watching on YouTube later,
role players.
Checking us out.